Ladies and gentlemen, it's with a heavy heart I must remind you that international break is over. This is the ArsenalVision Post-Match Podcast. My name is Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter. Ain't gonna not my finest intro, but who cares? The most important thing is that the international break is over and we can actually talk about Arsenal again. So this podcast, we're going to focus exclusively on the selection of a German to be the England team manager. I think it is obviously that, no, I'm kidding. We're not going to do that. We might touch on it, to be fair, but we are going to talk mostly about an extensive potential injury list for Arsenal and a trip to the Cherries, a game that has never had any drama for us in the past, always been just an easy 3 points, maybe once or twice, a little different than that, and a busy week ahead. I think we might even get to talk trap game today, which I'm pretty excited about. I think nothing brings in the listeners like debating what is a trap game and what qualifies as a trap game. So we will endeavor to discuss that with you. I do want to let you know, so launching imminently, you will be able to subscribe to what we formerly called Patreon on Apple Podcasts. And the reason for this is simple. There are regions of the world that for one reason or another, Patreon just not able to support. It just can't. And people have quite frustratingly, understandably said, like, this is annoying. This is like driving us nuts. Can you make this available some other way? There's been a lot of people also said, we just want to make it available in Apple Podcasts. So as a people pleaser as I am, always trying to make everybody happy all the time, sometimes at great expense to my own happiness and well-being, we are doing this. If there's any reason you can think of why like we shouldn't be doing this, just email and get in touch because I can't really think of anything, but it should be available. And you can sign up there. The only downside is Apple takes, 30% because why wouldn't they? So it's going to be $5.99. So it's 99 cents more on Apple than it is on Patreon. So I still say if you can do the Patreon thing, we'd love to have you there. If not, you'll have the Apple subscription capability. Either way, you can always have all the Patreon pods in your Apple player or any other player. The moral of the story is you can also do none of that and just listen here. These are all totally viable options. Alternatively, you could not even listen here. But like if you're not even listening here, you're not hearing me say don't listen here. That makes it all very complicated. So the easiest thing to do would just be to listen here, sign up for Patreon, sign up on Apple Podcasts, do both. And then you're really going to have content. You will definitely have content. That's the most important thing. And you'll always have the instant reaction, which we'll have after the Bournemouth game tomorrow. Enough of that. Clive's on Twitter at ClivePFC. Hello, Clive.
Hello.
And Andrew from the Arscast, you might know him as Arsblog on Threads, is here. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, Elliot. How are you?
How's Threads going for you, buddy?
I'm so dipping in and out, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm sort of social media detoxing. Is that the way?
Yeah. So what you could have done, see, all these years I've told everybody to block me on social media, and now I actually have no problems with social media. I just go and shout into the void and nobody's there. So it's perfect.
It's great. Sounds amazing.
It can you imagine how nice a world that would be? I do have to admit, though, I had to occasionally dip in over the last few days just to see some journalists freak out about a German managing the England national team. Do you have any, as a non-English person yourself, do you have any stake in that battle?
I've got no skin in that game. I mean, it's very, very funny to see some of these guys at the Daily Mail and what have you lose their reason, just display their true xenophobic heart. It's just very funny, really. It was bad enough they had an Irishman in charge for the last couple of games, and now they've got a German. Is the German going to sing the national anthem and wear a poppy? These are the important questions that the Daily Mail and its columnists will lose their reason over. He's a very good manager, a very good coach. England have got some amazing players, maybe a great generation of players who, if you looked online over the course of the summer, many people felt deserved a coach who could get the best out of those players. And there was a widespread feeling, wasn't there, that Gareth Southgate wasn't quite able to do that, even if he got them to the final of the Euros. So Thomas Tuchel is a guy who wins things. It's, if you're somebody who doesn't necessarily want England to win anything, it's not necessarily a great appointment. But if I were an England fan, and I was looking at a squad of players with Rice and Saka and Bellingham and, these guys in it, I would be a lot more confident about Thomas Tuchel being able to get them over the line than, let's say, Gareth Southgate or Graham Potter or even Eddie Howe, So I think it's a good appointment for England.
Should have given it Sherwood, but that's just my take. No, I think it is a good appointment, Andrew. What's funny is I do have to admit Sam Wallace, I think, is the one who's been making the rounds of my WhatsApp groups and the Discord with the, like 5 days ago, Pep Guardiola would be a masterstroke of ambition for England. And then like 2 days ago, hiring a German is a disgrace to English
Pep's
football.
not German. That's the thing. A foreigner and Germans, they're kind of distinct, maybe. I don't know. For some of those guys, anyway.
I need to learn the nuance. Yeah. I mean, and look, I just to avoid the flippancy for a minute, because I know people do take this quite seriously. I can understand the argument that, look, we require the players to be English. Why don't we require the manager to be English, right? That if you can only play players who are the nationality of the country, the manager should also fall into that. I guess then how far does it go? Like, do the sponsors have to all be English? Does the tea lady's probably English otherwise?
That's not the rule. The rule is about the players.
Right.
It's not the rule for managers or coaches. There is a line. There is a sort of fairly obvious distinction there. You know what I mean? That the players must be eligible to represent the country on the pitch, whereas the coach and the coaching staff can come from anywhere. So that's what countries do.
Look, I totally agree. I guess what I'm saying is I can accept that there are arguments that aren't based entirely on xenophobia. You know what I mean? Like, I can accept that there's a logic argument that people would say that the managerial component of it should adhere to the same rule that the players, but it doesn't. This is a good manager. It'll be good for these players. Clive, I'll give you a minute on this, and then I want to get into Arsenal injuries and Bournemouth and the most important stuff. But what I will say is I thought Mikel Arteta spoke brilliantly on this in his press conference earlier today as we record this. And he spoke like a man who loves England, feels at home in England, and potentially himself would want to be England manager someday, I dare say. The way he spoke about it with the reverence and respect and articulation that you'd expect from Mikel. But he was effusive in his praise of Tuchel, but he was also effusive in his praise of England for being a welcoming nation for him, for feeling like he belongs there. Any thoughts on that, sort of his response and the extent to which it may have for you presaged an interest in this at some point in his future?
Yeah, Mikel did his coaching badges in Wales, actually, because Wales has got a slightly easier pathway. I think Thierry Henry did badges out there as well. And maybe before we start talking about English blood, we should be thinking about how difficult do we make it for English people to be coaches in the first place. The cost compared to what they have to spend in Europe for a pro license and an A badge is significant. It's a lot of money. You need to be sponsored. Not everyone has that money. So let's have a look at that. Let's have a look at the construct of the courses, because these guys now at the very top level are mini CIOs. They're not cone carriers anymore. These are serious people that do proper leadership courses that manage many different facets of a massive club that's worth millions and millions and millions of pounds. And so I'm afraid when all these channels and radio shows flick to Harry Redknapp and Sam Allardyce and people like this to opine, they are really doing the game a disservice. Because as soon as Sam Allardyce got to the top job, what did he do with that? What did he do with it? His character wasn't shining. So yeah, I think we need a complete refresh and a look about how we're building these leaders, building these coaches, and what opportunities we're giving them and what pathways they have. And some of those pathways may need to be in other countries. Who knew? They might have to travel and learn elsewhere. I do a lot of rugby watching at the moment, and I think the South African, one of their main key coaches was an Irish guy called Felix Jones, and he's well renowned. And so yeah, it's what sport is at the top level. There's a finite group of people that can really execute and deliver, and Tuchel is one. And we felt him last year when he stood next to Mikel against Bayern Munich. I didn't think he was massively inferior. He didn't look at him and think, he didn't know what he's doing. The way he managed us, the way he managed our wide areas. And so we need to just grow up a little bit. For those people who want to live in that world regarding his Englishness, that's absolutely fine. That's your opinion, but it can't be the primary one. Let's have a look at some of the root causes as to why we're in this situation. I think that's what we need to do.
Yeah. If the manager is the CEO, does that make Manchester United Enron? Is that where we're at right now? Because their CEO is not particularly competent, bit of a fraud. Okay, we're rolling it back to Arsenal, Andrew. More importantly, frankly, we got some injury updates from Mikel in the press conference today. It seemed like mostly good news, honestly, across the board. I think everybody sounds like they're going to be in contention, although there's the question of whether he should be cautious, and you can maybe get into that a little bit with a busy week ahead. The one bit of bad news, it sounds like Tomiyasu has suffered a setback. I understand people reacting with frustration to that. Mikel was more generous, saying he's done everything right. He's working so hard. He's very good and we need him. And it is really unfortunate for the player, obviously. We've had other players like this previously who just cannot get and stay fit. In fact, we still have one in Kieran Tierney. And, there's no part of me that believes Tomiyasu is not trying his hardest to be fit. So it's just unfortunate. But with respect to the players that are a little bit more in contention, what do you think is the right approach for this game? This sets up as the potential trap game in a way, not because of what's before it, but because of what comes after it. How much should Mikel be cautious here, and how much can he afford to be cautious, if at all?
I mean, I think you have to be a little bit when players go away and they pick up a knock, whether it's Saka, whether it's Martinelli, players like Timber, Havertz, White, who didn't go on international duty. I mean, it's just so hard to gauge what he's saying and how much impact that's going to have on the team selection this weekend, because he's sort of, I think he was a little bit vague on the right-hand side when it comes to Timber and White. But I would be surprised if one of them didn't make it. There is a game, of course, on Tuesday against Shakhtar, and then, of course, next weekend against Liverpool. So I think he just has to go game by game on this and just try and see. I mean, we have a squad now. We've talked about this, and you've talked about it ad infinitum. We've got to.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, I don't mean that you go on and on about the same things over and over again, Elliot. I just mean that it's been a discussion point, right, where we have talked about Mikel Arteta needing to use his squad, and maybe this season, particularly in the forward areas or the wide areas, he's got the ability to not take risks with players if he does have a little bit of a doubt. So if there is a doubt about Martinelli for this game, being able to do 90 minutes or being able to start, he's got Jesus, he's got Sterling, he's got Trossard. Again, depending what happens with Havertz, if there's more than a doubt about Saka, he's got Sterling who can play there as well on the right-hand side. Like I said, it's just so hard to know exactly what information he puts in the public domain that we take at face value, or what he's trying to put out there to try and obscure the kind of team that he's going to select against Bournemouth. But there's 3 games in a week, Bournemouth, Champions League game, then Liverpool. So he's going to have to use his squad. And I think after the international break, if there's any slight doubt about any of the players who are away, I think this might be the game where we see them on the bench and we have them in reserve if need be.
Yeah, and with all due respect to Shakhtar, I still regard this game as the bigger and tougher game of the two, away to Bournemouth and home to Shakhtar.
Sure.
And so, how he balances that will be interesting to see. But Clive, it's definitely the case where you're demanded to have a squad that you trust and have strength and depth. But then when it comes time to actually rotate and use that squad, there's a lot of anxiety about doing that. You think about players like Jesus and Sterling in particular. So how do you think about how he should manage his way through this week? Because let's face it, all of us in the back of our mind maybe have one eye on Liverpool. We know they haven't really played anybody yet per se, but it has been a very strong start for them. Liverpool coming to the Emirates is going to be their first big test, and we want to be at the right strength to give them a very tough challenge, a stern test in that game. So how do you think about these 2 games before that one, staying focused on them, and how we should select for these games?
Yeah, well, Liverpool have Chelsea this weekend, so we get a good chance to have a look at them and see what they're like against a pretty good team. That's quite quick, very fast in attack. Maybe not so great off the ball, but very good as they're moving forward. So have a real test, see what happens in that game, see how the goals go, what order they come in. So Liverpool's on my mind as well, Elliot. I think they have yet to be tested. But Arsenal have seemed to have got this way of creating consistent results no matter how they're playing. And I look at Bournemouth, I always worry about Bournemouth. For some reason, I always worry about it. We look at the results, we seem to do really well there. I always worry about getting out of the block slowly on that tight pitch and the crowd getting up. But I've never actually been there. So I haven't got a good experience of the environment. So maybe I've got the environment completely wrong based on what I think it is on TV. But it is a place, well, a manager that understands how to do the high press, how to work, how to play, how to pressure people into mistakes. But they have lost. I think they lost a game to Leicester in their last game, and I think that's going to be in their mind. And so if Leicester are managing to beat them, we should be managing to beat them. From watching the ladies' team over the last week or so, I think some of their issues have been maybe focusing on the next game. Just focus on the game that's in front of you. It's really important. As soon as you start to look ahead, that's when you trip over. And if we take these points, I think City have got quite a comfortable game. We need to take these points, stay where we are. Shakhtar will take care of itself. And then Liverpool, the top boys come out and they start. But I never worry about this, whether Sterling will start. I think he might suit that environment. It's a tight environment, small pitch environment, where he's not having to do as much sprinting over long distances. He could be the perfect player for this game. I'm not worried about it. I'm just worried about, can he contribute for 60 minutes or can he contribute for 30 minutes? I think that's the most important thing, because we don't want Martinelli, if he does start, to do 90. And listening to Andrew, he's probably thinking maybe if he's a risk, he's one that sits on the bench. And I tend to agree with that thinking.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, Bournemouth have had some bad results, but on underlying metrics, which I know everybody loves, they've looked really good. The attack is near the top part of the table. The defense is solidly mid-table or a bit higher, actually. They've been a bit unlucky. Semenyo's been excellent. One of the better attacking players in the league so far in this early part of the season. So I think it is a case where you could be guilty of looking at the results and thinking that this might be a bit easier than it's meant to be. Mikel spoke glowingly about them and their manager, Andrew. I mean, do you think that this is a case of we just have to learn to manage the pressure of feeling like we have to win every game? Because I think for me, when we were just trying to get back in the top four, things like that, games felt less existential. But when you're chasing Manchester City, games have a way to feel existential, right? Because you just feel like you can't drop any points. And Mikel has talked about that. He said if we think about it like that, we'll run out of oxygen right before the end of the season. So both as supporters, but also as a manager and as the team, how do you approach a game like this, knowing that we should be beating them, but every game is a challenge, and you have to approach it with the right attitude, but without being overly intense about needing to win every single game all season,
Well, I just think that's probably hardwired into the way this team is set up now.
Yeah.
They know what the demands are, what we need if we want to go and win this league. And that means, with all due respect to Bournemouth, when you go there, you've got to take 3 points, right? Same when they come to our place. I think this is a team right now that is well set up to cope with both the physical pressures and the psychological or mental pressures that this league is capable of throwing at you. I think we've seen.
I'm definitely not, just so we're clear.
No,
I am not prepared to
am I.
cope with the psychological pressure of it all.
I think that it's very different for us, right? We are thinking about things in a very different way.
Yeah.
They're looking at this compartmentalized as a game that they have to win 90 minutes, and then they'll turn around and go to the next game and the next game. And we're always thinking a little bit ahead. We're thinking about what if, what happens, how does our momentum go? But I think the team, as we've seen over the course of this season, are well capable of dealing with setbacks. They're well capable of dealing with pressure, whether it's in-game, whether it's pre-game. All of these situations that we've had to deal with, I think Arsenal have come through the opening part of this season really, really well. So going into a game like this, I feel like, I'm always worried. You're worried. I'm sure Clive is worried. You're always thinking about what can happen in a game of football. Clive's never worried, actually. That's true. I'm doing him a disservice here. You spend any time with Clive, he's not worried about anything apart from having to walk in anything that isn't lycra. But
That's true.
I think the team completely understands what is required at all times, because I think it's not something that Arteta has just said, right, one day, this is what we have to do. It's been drilled into them and into this group of players and this evolving group of players that we've put together over the last 2-3 seasons, where, people have come, people have gone, but now it really, really, really feels like Mikel Arteta's Arsenal. I think to be part of it, to be a consistent part of it, you have to understand. You have to understand what the demands are. And, there is always pressure away from home in the Premier League. Every team is capable. Every team can cause you problems. But that will just be part of the routine, if you like, of the pre-game preparation. And then it's about executing the game plan and hopefully, dealing with whatever Bournemouth have to offer. And if we need to react in some way to something that doesn't quite go the way that we plan, I think we've also shown that that's something we're capable of this season as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Mikel actually was a little critical of his team for goals they conceded against Leicester and Southampton in his press conference. I actually think we were a bit unfortunate in both instances, frankly, in games where we were dominant, but we showed we could go up a level when the game got tough again and go and win it again. I don't think we want to have to win games twice. I don't think that's a habit we want to get into. And so even though we had dominant performances from a statistical standpoint against Southampton and Leicester, I think it would be nice to have a more routine, if you accept the word, victory where we're able to win it once and then keep it one. And ideally then start making those substitutions that you would have an eye on in those kind of games. Now that can be a disrespectful way to speak about an opponent like Bournemouth, but that would be the hope. Clive, the interesting thing, and we've talked about this on the pod before, is we're still in the lab, right? We're still becoming the team we're going to be for this season. Martin Odegaard did not suffer a setback, but still probably quite some way away from coming back, which means the midfield is still a bit of a work in progress. It's looked pretty good with Partey, Rice, and Havertz in there. But Mikel Merino's here now. He got some minutes under his belt in the international break. I saw some comps going around, a performance for Spain that looked pretty impressive, I thought, even if he started to fade around the hour mark, which is understandable from a fitness standpoint. I think it's pretty good that he got to go away and play with his nation, to be honest. Is this the game where he starts to evolve that midfield and Declan Rice moves back to more the right-sided midfield? Merino comes in. Is that too much tinkering for a game coming right out of the international break? What do you think for midfield, and when will the time be for Merino to make his debut from the start?
That they could both start in centre mid, and Thomas Partey could easily be right back based on injury, right? Easily be right back.
True.
And by the way, when he did play right back in the last game, the two players on the right-hand side ahead of him had their best games of the season because he kept feeding them, right? So, and Saka had the most take-ons, most carries, etc. So I think when you say in the lab, I think there's a desire to reach that optimal 11. When we won't, we get a tweet saying Tomiyasu's done out of nowhere. Do you know what I mean? You don't know what's around the corner. So the key is, have you got the players to adapt on that particular day? And so if we do leave three right backs like we have done, we've got a player that can play in there. When we do leave centre mids, because don't forget Jorginho played last game, so Marino might come in and think, okay, let's have a look at those two together in our 4-4-2 and see how we look. Maybe one of the wide men may change based on injury. That could work easily. But do we have the ability to adapt to field positions, then change our game accordingly based on those players' strengths? And do we have the ability to adapt to what the opposition are giving you? I think on both these aspects, I think we've really improved. Really improved. And I think this is, you hear about this word, air quotes, this team knows how to win. Right? What does that mean? This team knows how to win. Most of that is how you adapt to the circumstances, how you adapt to what's on offer, how you adapt to injury, how do you get over certain moments. Man City did last year with no De Bruyne for 3 months. They just did it. They adapted. And we have to get to that mindset and maybe stop thinking, okay, when are we going to get everyone back so we can now judge our best team? When actually, if you look historically, even back to Invincible days, how many times did that team we know actually start in a season? It wasn't that many. Yeah. So this whole thing is, in my mind, I just want to see players who can play our way, who are not scared to play, who are not unintelligent and don't see the game that's on offer for them, to play with instinct, and then play with when someone else goes, someone else covers. I think that's what we're trying to do. I think this is where the coaching has stepped up massively for me this year, to the point, we could lose the game on the weekend, right? But to the point where I think, crikey, another team have to do well to beat us. That's how I feel right now. I feel that's where I am. But obviously, you never can tell in life, right?
Those are all.
Sorry, can I just? I think what Clive said there about this team knows how to win. I think maybe this team knows how to not lose as well, which is, sometimes depending on the way the game is going or the circumstances of the game, as we've seen with, 2 games playing basically a full half with 10 men. That's a huge disadvantage. And we can get, up in arms about why those red cards were issued, but let's not forget that is a huge disadvantage. And on neither occasion did we lose those games. So I think that's part of where we've gone this season for me anyway.
Yeah. Just building on Clive's point, Andrew, can you tell me our exact optimal 11 and when you think we'll see it? Okay. Look, I have to admit, I do that. And I think we all do that as an exercise, right? We think about game for your life, right? Clive, you brought that up. Who's starting, in what position, how are we going to play? I think one thing, though, that has been a little bit interesting about this season, I actually heard this on the Arscast this week, Andrew, talking a little bit about, we no longer have one set system that you can close your eyes and picture where everyone's going to be standing and exactly what their roles are going to be. The system changes from game to game, but also even within games. You blink and Calafiori's standing in the opposition, attacking third, and a midfielder standing in the left back position. So there's definitely a lot of rotation. I have to admit, I'm really curious to see what Marino's involvement will mean for Rice's role and how that all shifts things around and shifts pieces around the board. Do you think we might see Marino start this game, though? And how do you think about his influence causing some domino effects throughout the squad and how we play?
I'm not sure about this game. I'd be very surprised if he didn't start against Shakhtar Donetsk.
Okay.
I'm with Clive in that we might be slightly hamstrung in that if Timber isn't available, if White isn't available, then it's going to be Thomas Partey at right back, which is not necessarily something any of us would like to see in an ideal world, but if needs must, that's the way it might go. Therefore, I think the midfield might set up a little bit differently. I'm with you. I'm curious to see what he becomes in this team when people are fit. I think what's interesting about the moment, Arsenal at the moment, is that without Odegaard, we haven't. When he got injured, everyone was like, "What are we going to do to replace Odegaard? How are we going to replace him? Who is going to replace him?" And the reality is, nobody did. You can't replace him. He has a very singular function in the team in terms of, his influence on the ball and off the ball. So Arteta has looked at that and said, well, can I get somebody in to do what Odegaard does, but do it at 70% of his quality? Yes, maybe he could have done that, but has decided to go in a very different way. I think when Odegaard is back, that's when I think we might see what Marino has been brought in for. Because I think Rice dropping deep, I think the Rice-Marino-Odegaard triangle is what we will see ideally. Again, we don't know what might happen with injuries and suspension, but I think he gives us something in that left-hand side, particularly if Calafiori continues to play at left back, where his dynamism and his ability to get around the pitch means that Marino might be somebody who links with Rice, obviously, when those gaps appear, but also as a function of creating more down our left-hand side. And I think he's somebody who can get into the box well. We've talked about the duels that he can win. If we're going long from goal kicks, all those kinds of things, those are attributes that he can bring. But I do think he is perhaps going to bring a little more to the attacking third than people think. Like, he's going to win lots of tackles. He's going to win lots of aerials. But I think he is going to be asked to do something similar to Granit Xhaka. Again, the proof will be in the pudding when we see it at some point. But that's just my suspicion about how he might influence the way that this team plays.
I'm super curious to see what he adds, because as I think to the Liverpool game, and I realize we're falling into the trap of talking about the Liverpool game when we play Bournemouth tomorrow, but if I think that there's a weakness in Liverpool's team, I'd really like to stiffly examine the robustness of their midfield. They got a bunch of 8s and 10s, right? They got McAllister and Szoboszlai and Gravenberch. And if you get a Marino and Rice and Kai in that zone, or even if it's Partey, like, I think you can really test them in terms of physicality, robustness, athleticism in there. And that's going to be a fascinating duel. What happens in the middle of the park. And as you know, Mikel likes to win duels. Clive, you want to expand on what Andrew was saying?
Yeah, just on Marino actually, because he had a couple of games. I think he had around 100 minutes for Spain, didn't he, over the break, and so he got a couple of chances to have a look at him, didn't you? Really, in a different environment, and he sort of played different positions, and his heat map was quite broad. When we scouted him, Elliot, if you notice how many times he was on the right half of the pitch, which I quite liked. But what I really, just from looking at him this week, and I'm going to say something, it's going to be controversial, but the way he receives the ball more like a 6 than maybe Declan Rice does. Now, receiving the ball is the key for your next pass, right? How the ball flows through you. So I see Scott did an article today on Rice versus Partey passing. I was reading it. I thought that's interesting. But actually, the key difference between the two is how they receive the ball. It's how they take the ball, because that gives the quality of pass. It's not park accuracy. It's like your progression. I know some of the progression stuff is quite close at the moment, but without Odegaard, that's the key progressor. Partey to Odegaard's the key link, right? So the take-on ability of Marino, deep or high, is really good, really good. And just in phases of the game, you can see him on the little seesaw, on the slant. I can take it. I can drop into the 8 and not be the high 8 like Granit Xhaka was and never really came back until he had to as we're under pressure. I can take it. So they can share that role. And the way we're playing this double pivot right now, that's actually perfect. That they can both play behind and ahead of each other. Rice has played ahead for a while. Marino's been ahead. But they could also equally comfortable in dropping back into that primary first receiver. But also with Marino, he can also play on the right 8 side of things and do reverse passes and things like that. And it comes back to where we started the conversation around adaptability and recognizing and learning how to win and doing things in different parts of the pitch. I find him very exciting, but I almost don't want to recreate the Granit Xhaka thing because people have seen that. But there will be a day when we need to do that. And he can do that as well and arrive in the box with the same ability, if not greater ability in the box. And so we go back to the old school Arsenal with a 1 and a 2 in midfield, and Odegaard plays the pass into the box for somebody like Marino to finish. So we have all these things to do now, but watch out for Marino behind the ball more than you think, particularly when he's playing a double pivot. But that's okay, and that's okay. And honestly, it's a good thing that he can actually do that. And maybe Rice's weakness is his take-on ability, how he approaches the ball. Not his passing. His passing is unreal. It's his ability to take the ball on under pressure, on the half turn, back foot, next pass is easy. That's what he needs to develop. And once he does that, he's going to the absolute sky. Honestly, the sky.
Well said. Andrew only agreed to come on if he got to hear an ad read, so I'll do one for him now. Yeah, you're welcome. We got a new product from our friends at NordVPN called Saily. And it's spelled Saily. Saily. What it is an app for eSIM. So once upon a time, I'd go over to Europe and I'd like buy a SIM card, right? And you physically stick it in your phone and things like that. Andrew, you'll remember once upon a time you'd go over and you'd buy a calling card so you could go to like phone booths and call people. Not that you're old or anything, but no, now they have eSIM. There's no SIM cards anymore. There's eSIM. And so the Saily app from the people at NordVPN gives you a safe, easy, and effective way to get a SIM for the region you're always going to. You can go into the app, pick the region you're going, over 160 countries across 8 regions, helps you stay connected anywhere around the world. And it's cheaper than, I just noticed like my AT&T plan, they raised the daily rate for global data access, which I didn't know until I got back from traveling. That's really helpful. Thanks for that. So yeah, this is a cheap, easy, affordable, safe way. It's compatible with iOS and Android. They have 24/7 support on a chat line and a full refund if your eSIM isn't compatible. So you can go ahead and get the app. It's the Saily app. Get an exclusive 15% discount on eSIM data plans with our code. Go to Saily app and use the code ArsenalVision at checkout, or go to saily.com/ArsenalVision. That's Saily, SILY.com, code ArsenalVision. Clive, is that enough of that?
Indeed.
Nailed it. Andrew, satisfactory? You feel that Everything worked out right there?
Yeah, I'm going to go and get one of those, whatever it is you were talking about right now.
Great. Thank
What
you
was
for
it? I don't know.
I can't mention it because the people who are listening on Patreon get an ad-free version. I can no longer say anything about the product after the ad break because otherwise they get very, very upset, understandably. Andrew, Mikel was full of praise for Kai Havertz in his press conference. Kai Havertz has been the skeleton key for us this season, in my opinion. Bukayo Saka has been our best player and one of the best players in the world, full stop. But Kai Havertz has been the skeleton key. His ability to go into other positions and play in different zones across the pitch, sometimes in the box, sometimes defensive third, midfield, all of the zones. There are 3 of them. He can play in all of them. And I think that he is the one who, because of that versatility, we're just very comfortable sort of shifting him to other positions, right? So like, oh, Marino will come in and we'll just move Kai back to 9. And there's this sort of sense that he'll just be good wherever we put him. What do you think about Kai's best role for us, the best use of him? And if he's, the partnership he struck up with Trossard, they've almost played like a 2, right? Like alternating a support striker and striker at times. What do you think of that particular role? How Kai has played, and is there a way we can get more from him, or have to be careful about adjusting what he's been doing?
I mean, I think obviously the best we've seen from Kai Havertz has come when he's played up front, whether it's on his own or in that sort of duo with Trossard, where I think they have a really interesting dynamic and understanding between the two of them. I like him most, I think, as the 9, as our focal point in attack. But I don't think even when he is deployed as the 9, that's just where he plays. I think what's been so impressive about him has been the way he has flourished or decided that he wants to get involved in almost every aspect of the game. He wants to influence the game in both boxes. I think if you look at a game where perhaps, let's say we've been under a little bit of pressure and we've had some set pieces or we've had some corners, if you look at the stats and see who has made the most clearances, you normally expect your centre halves to be top of the list, and usually they're thereabouts. But Kai Havertz is there as well. Like if Saliba's made 5 clearances, Kai Havertz has made 5 or 6, and Gabriel has made 8 or whatever it is. So I think his and this is a conversation that's been had about other players as well, is the defensive work that he puts in, as well as the output he gives us at the other end of the pitch, has been just so impressive. And I think there's a direct link between his effectiveness as an attacker and his newly found desire to get involved in the physical side of the game, whether that's defensive, whether it's making challenges, whether it's making tackles, whether it's like there was the stats going around this week. I wasn't there who's run the most this season, and he is like 5 or 6 kilometers ahead of any other player at this point. So there is just such a work rate there. It's just so hard not to be impressed by him, because I think if you go back to this time last year, or maybe not this time last year, but to this game last year when we were away at Bournemouth, and they gave him that penalty and everyone's like, it's just a charity penalty, what a difference it's made. And where we are in 12 months or a little over 12 months is night and day for Kai Havertz. And you can talk about why that might be. You can talk about all the intangibles, confidence, belief, feeling settled, feeling happy, feeling trusted by the manager and trusted by his teammates. I think the thing is with him, you can put him pretty much anywhere in the positions where he functions best and get a good performance out of him. Whereas I don't know that was true in the opening part of his Arsenal career. But to go back to where to what you said first, I think him up front at the moment is where I like him best. And, if we have the ability to do that against a team like Bournemouth, who I think, will cause us problems, I think what Havertz can deliver in the centre forward position is just distinct from everybody else that we have in the squad right now.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it's just tough because it's kind of like your body. My calf hurts, so I go to the doctor. Say, my calf hurts. And he says, well, that's because your back's messed up. Well, what do you mean my calf is what hurts? Well, it's because your back's messed up. Well, okay, something's happening in my back that's causing my calf to hurt. What does this have to do with anything? I'm not sure. I just wanted to share that. No, it actually has something to do with something. It's the point that, is it the relationship Trossard and Havertz have where they can alternate positions and play more as a 2 up front that's actually creating some of these really interesting dynamics and letting Kai play well? There's so many cascading impacts, right? Related impacts throughout the squad and the positions they take up that are hard to diagnose just on the face of it. I do think that I agree that Kai at 9 is his best role and where we look best. But then maybe there is something to the fact that defenses are finding it harder to key on him from the positions where he's making his runs now and not sure whether to pick up Trossard or Kai Havertz. So, Clive, I think what we've found with Odegaard out is ways to maybe be a little less predictable and static in where people take up their positions. And maybe do you think defenses are finding it harder to track runs and identify their man because of that fluidity? Is that something we want to be careful to maintain as we look forward to eventually getting Odegaard back, or just as we evolve with the squad?
Yeah, I think we've always had the ability to find spaces, particularly when Odegaard's there. I think there might be an over-reliance on him to fix everything. Even when you're sitting there watching, you want him to have the ball because you know that once he gets it, something good will happen. You know what I mean? And so we've had a bit more of a collective responsibility. So and Andrew said it earlier on. If you look at how we play now, our fullbacks are more dynamic. We're playing a little bit more of a settled 2 in midfield. So fullbacks are springing off their spot a little bit more. We're defending with a block 4. And we have a relationship up front with 2 4s, sharing one side of the pitch each. So creating combinations on the left and the right-hand side. So Trossard's take care of the left, Havertz taking care of the right. On occasions, they go one behind each other, 1+1. And so we're doing all these things. Odegaard can do everything that Trossard does. Exactly the same system. Just step straight in there with his best mate Havertz and do exactly the same. The difference may be the sides they take up. Odegaard may stay on the right side. That would be the difference. Havertz's key thing for me is when we're playing, we can just find him. So he seems to know where to be as we're exiting. And that's really important. So he's available in either to come short, to go long, or to go channels, or just be that point from a David Raya long kick. So he becomes irreplaceable to me in the squad. For me, there's no one else. He's the one player we can't replace. Honestly, the way he plays. And so that ability to be found has given us so much direction in 2024. I've been trying to find data on 2024 year-to-date stats with Kai Havertz up front. I think it'd be shocking. The one game he didn't start up front, guess which one it was? It was Aston Villa at home. Right? So it'll be quite shocking, his impact on us. And maybe when the rest of the world isn't actually seeing it. I haven't got that. Elliot, you got to help me out. Find the tables for me. But yeah, that information, his impact is significant in this group. And I don't see it changing. My worry is we need to rest him every now and again. And we can't do it in international breaks only. So the only way to do it is to buy someone else like him so he can sit down.
Yeah. Or, find games where we trust the squad. And that's going to be big in the next 2 weeks because we have Shakhtar at home midweek of this week, and we have Preston, North End, midweek of next week. Those are games where obviously we're going to have to take the opportunity to get some rest for some players. One player that I sort of wonder, Andrew, if there's a critical moment arriving for is Ethan Nwaneri, in the sense that we haven't gotten to see as much of him as we might have expected, I think in part because of what happened against Southampton and Leicester, which are games that otherwise might have presented an opportunity to bring him in. I think the expectation that he would play in Champions League, given the games that we've had so far in the Champions League, was unrealistic. But with Shakhtar at home and Preston, those are 2 games where I think we might get a chance to see him, and who knows what will happen in the Bournemouth game. With Odegaard, then on the horizon of coming back, and some of the fixtures getting quite tricky again, Chelsea away, Newcastle away, Liverpool, all those kind of games. Do you see these next couple midweek games as really important opportunities for Nwaneri? Because we all want to see him play. There's plenty of time. I mean, at his age, if he hardly plays at all this season, it won't be the end of the world. But we all sort of think he's ready for more. Do you think that these next 2 midweek games are a chance for Nwaneri to show something that will just further increase the manager's trust to use him in more pressurized situations?
Preston for sure. I think that's an obvious starter for him and some of the other younger players. Shakhtar, it might depend on what happens this weekend, how hard we're tested. You said at the start, ideally it would be nice to get into a lead and win the game. I think that would have been the plan for Southampton and Leicester, but they didn't play out that way. We had to keep going. We had to keep plugging away and game state plays a part in the opportunities that are available to players like Ethan Nwaneri. Again, we were talking maybe about this when Odegaard got injured first. Would you be happy to see Nwaneri start some of these games or some of the games that we had? And yes, I would, but I could understand why that didn't happen. Shakhtar could well be a case where he gets a start. We've got Liverpool on the horizon. I think it's a Tuesday game against Shakhtar, isn't it? So there is when's Liverpool? Sunday or Saturday?
I assume it's Sunday, but that's a great question.
Mate. Sunday,
right? So there's plenty of time, but Saturday evening to Tuesday evening is relatively short. So there might be a case where he needs to, because it's a home game, rotate a little and bring some players in and start them and trust the quality on the bench if it doesn't turn out the way we want. Like, I don't think you can take any game for granted, but I do think there is scope when you're playing a team like Shakhtar Donetsk. You can make some changes and give some players some minutes, and he would certainly be somebody I'd love to see start a Champions League game. I think unquestionably he'll start against Preston. Maybe a Champions League start just gives a little bit more. I don't know how do I explain it? It just sort of puts him up another step, Starting an EFL Cup game, a Carabao Cup game is great. And this is what we want that competition for. And we've been handed a pretty favourable draw in the last round. And I think this is a pretty favourable draw as well. But maybe a Champions League start puts him on another step and just sort of aids his development a little bit. So I would not be against it one bit, but I think it may well depend on how this weekend goes and whether or not players have been pushed to a limit where it becomes more of a requirement to rotate for the midweek game.
Yeah, and just where Shakhtar is concerned, they have a pretty good history in Europe, and we've seen some very strong Shakhtar teams. That doesn't look to be the case right now. They drew 0-0 with Bologna, and then they got absolutely massacred by Atalanta. It was only 3-0 on the scoreline, but I think they were outshot 22-5. It was like 2.6 to 0.3 XG. They looked terrible. I don't think it's a strong Shakhtar team, but it is still the Champions League. And because we don't really know how this league table thing is going to look, you certainly can't afford to drop points. But one of the other things, I hate to say it, but goal difference might be really important. You want to finish in the top 8. I would imagine there's going to be teams level on points at 8, 9, or 10th position or whatever, where goal difference determines if you've got another round or not. So as much as I realize that you can't just say, oh, we need to not just win, but hammer them. Look, you got to focus on beating the opposition. But a 4-0 or a 5-0 or a 6-0 can go a long way and wind up being important in the final accounting of whether we have an extra round of Champions League to play come February. So that complicates things a little bit. As a final word here on this weekend, though, Clive, I think the point is, and we touched on this earlier, right? I'm already panicking about this game. Why? Because I'm going to panic about every game because I know the margins are so fine. Obviously, the players are not going to go into it like that, I wouldn't think. I do think that Mikel has some good dressing room material with what happened against Southampton and Leicester because he can help them maintain vigilance. You've just come back from an international break. You know Liverpool's on the horizon. You got Champions League in midweek. This is a game where keeping focus is going to be priority one. And I think those near accidents against Leicester and Southampton help him remind these players what happens if you relax even for a moment. But if there is any concern about Saka, about Martinelli, I don't think there is about Kai, but about some of these players, do you feel confident that he can go to guys like Jesus or someone like Sterling? Can the squad step up if needed this weekend? How confident are you that if he has to sit down some of the players that we've depended on, that we can still get the job done?
Yeah, I think we will. I think there's so many injury doubts at the moment. I think old Stewart's have to have a smaller lens on his camera because so he doesn't get everyone to get everybody in, right? So there's so many issues at the moment. And Mikel wants to keep that all secret. Yeah, look, we have to wait and see. I think Bournemouth is one of those where you can see it. Sorry, you can see it in Mikel's press conference today that he did speak about the goals conceded recently, and he's almost going to use that. And I think there's always a way to get people back in the room emotionally. That emotional connection to remind them of how they felt last year. Mate, all you got to do is play the video of them walking around the pitch that last home game. Just in case you want to forget where we were, let's just play the video of you clapping the fans the last home game to remind you what we don't want to be doing again. We don't want to be doing that because we dropped a couple of silly points because we didn't focus when we should have done. I keep saying this one to you, Elliot, but our worst day should be better than their best day. That's where we need to get to. So if we are not at
that's what Mikel said in preseason.
Yeah,
said the same thing. Yep.
That's it. That's exactly. I was re-quoting him. Our worst day has to be better than their best day, and we've shown that in recent games. So we may not look good in all the underlyings in it, going in the league tables, etc. But we won these games pretty well, and unlucky in a couple of games to 10 men. I'm sitting there thinking, the Brighton one still bothers me. It still bothers me a lot how that, if you draw at City, you can take it, you can live, but the Brighton one was just taken away, and a few errors for me in adjustment to what was on offer in the game. And we end up drawing a game where we were cruising to a 2-0, minimum 2-0 win, right? So that concerns me. So we've got to get some points to get back. But that's how Bournemouth are going to feel. They're going to feel they've got to get the Leicester points back against us. And so we've just got to make sure that our desire to win is greater than theirs and deal with them. Simple.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely, as much as I joke about being nervous, I have a big trust in this group that's probably bigger than I've had for any Arsenal team in a long time, because I think our game model works and we seem to be able to pull players out and put players in and still look like Arsenal. We've all seen Arsenal teams in past years where a player would come out, another player would come in, and we just lost our identity. That doesn't seem to happen. Same final question for you, Andrew, just in terms of if some players have to come out and some players have to come in, do you feel comfortable with the options? It might need to be a Kiwior, it might need to be a Partey at right back. It might need to be a Sterling or a Jesus. Do you have the same level of confidence that if those players have to come in, that the performance level should stay roughly what we expect?
I don't know about performance levels, but are we capable of winning games with those players? Yes, I think we are. We've won games. I don't like Partey at right back, but we've won games with Partey at right back. Kiwior wouldn't be my first choice at left back, but we've won games and played well with Kiwior at left back. I think the two maybe with a bit to prove are Jesus and Sterling. Because he's just arrived and things, didn't go that great for him at Chelsea. He's got a point to prove. And Jesus, as I said on the Arsecast, I think he just needs a goal and a cuddle and things will pick up for him from there, but those are the two maybe where, there is a gap right now in terms of end product between Saka and Martinelli and Jesus and Sterling, if those are the two players that you have to play. But it's not as if you're bringing in nobodies or has-beens or guys who've never produced for you, So I feel confident that this is a group of players where even if there are a couple missing, the collective determination and belief that they can go and win games without these players. You win a derby, a North London derby without Declan Rice and Martin Odegaard. Bang, that is belief. That bolsters you, if you're one of the Arsenal players. So, it's something we're going to have to get used to. We're going to have more injuries. The schedule is busier than it ever has been. We're going to have to get used to being without certain players. And I think, as I said earlier, what we've seen from this Arsenal team is an ability to get results even when circumstances aren't ideal. And I think that is a big step forward from where we've been in the not too distant past. So whatever team he picks or whatever team he has to pick, I'm confident they can get the job done. I'm not saying it's a sure thing or anything like that, but I don't worry that the absence of one or two players completely hamstrings us anymore. I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, I agree. And I will say, I do think because of what the scoreline was and how it went down, and on second watch, I have to admit, I think the Jesus and Sterling performances were maybe a bit misunderstood in the last game against Southampton. And, honestly, by me as well, I think because of the nervous energy during the game. I know we need to get out of here, but a final thought on that, Clive?
Yeah, and me, I think, is at the other end of the ground to me on those early flashes that didn't quite go in. But I do think the overall feeling, particularly around Jesus, for me, is a bit more of the say worrying one. I just want to see him come out of that little sort of. It feels like an emotional slump rather than a physical slump. Because when I'm watching him, mate, he can move. He can move, but when your head's not quite there, whether it's confidence or belief in yourself, all the actions that are very instinctive for him, which is he's an instinctive, tricky player, become a little bit more laboured. And but as soon as he just fires one in from the corner flag, which he's got the ability to do, then we'll be off and running again, right? And it wasn't so long ago we were saying the same thing about Martinelli. Now we're all mentally thinking about his calf and wondering if we know if he's going to be all right again, because we see him loose and looking confident and working on and off the ball. Literally a month ago, we weren't so sure. So he can change quick. So let's see what happens.
Yeah. And I will say, given Martinelli's track record against Liverpool, he's the one I wouldn't mind if we had to wrap in cotton wool a little bit and be ready for that game. I want him fit and firing for that game. You know what? If Martinelli's on the bench, if Marino's on the bench, we got a lot of strength that we could bring in to win this game later if we need to. I feel pretty confident, but we'll see how I'm feeling on the instant reaction. Hopefully jubilant at a 10-0. We've gone a minute over how long we said we'd keep you, Andrew. So this is the moment to knock it on the head. Andrew is on Threads at @RSPOG. Thanks, bud.
Thank you very much indeed. Good to talk.
Yep. Clive's on Twitter at ClivePFC. Thanks, Clive.
Thank you very much.
My name is Elliot Smith, and just about anywhere you can block me at Yankee Gunner. We will leave it there. We'll have an instant reaction for you tomorrow and a main pod again on Monday, and a very, very busy couple of weeks ahead. So that'll be fun after the international break. So we love you, and we will talk to you after Arsenal 10. Bournemouth 0.